Hello, brilliant Chaucer minds. We are going to dive into a little background of Geoffrey Chaucer and his times. So, Chaucer's life and times. Here they are breaking some dance moves. We're going to start way back with the Roman Empire falling in 476 AD. Step one, the Roman Empire gets too large to defend. As you can see, it made the Mediterranean Sea a backyard lake. It spanned all the way from almost Scotland, or part of Scotland, all the way down to Egypt and all the way to the Middle East. Don't worry, boys, we can defend this huge thing. Step two, the Romans tried to defend it against barbarian incursions anyway. Get on your helmet, boys. It's going to be a struggle. And they march out. The boys are marching. Step three, barbarian kings order their attack. All right, boys, I want you to kill the Romans. Step four, barbarian warriors charge into battle. In this case, just one barbarian warrior. But he's pretty tough. Step five, general carnage ensues. So barbarians go rushing in, and there we go. Step six, they batter the walls of the city of Rome. Now that's metaphorical, but they're trying to crash in to the city of Rome to destroy it. So here he is. Not a particularly, great technique. Step seven, the Roman Empire falls. Symbolic of this wall collapsing. And then culture, books, art are all burned. The Greco-Roman civilization is lost. Before it was a proud empire, now it's anarchy. The Dark Ages begin. There was a lot of screaming and running. Now, I always say that the Middle Ages covers really two periods, each divided into half. The first half, lasting roughly 500 years, is the Dark Ages. And that is the period of the barbarians taking over after the fall of Rome. And here are actual video footage of barbarians taking over. Different barbarians at different places, of course. So general carnage, burning, looting, and mayhem. Barbarians, over time, settle in and develop a literature, a language, and a culture of their own. For example, Beowulf. He looked exactly like this. That's actual historical footage of Beowulf. And then Grendel, he's busy just biting the heads off of warriors, Anglo-Saxon warriors. Now, the second half of the Middle Ages is what I call the High Middle Ages. Feudalism helped society evolve into a very flourishing high culture, a very glorious culture. So they're putting together castles like this one. This is Edinburgh Castle, not too shabby. They're developing cathedrals, Gothic architecture with this slightly pointed Gothic arch at the top, which enables for beautiful, magnificent, soaring architecture, grand, like the Cathedral de Notre Dame in Paris. So this is the High Middle Ages. In England, you can see that it starts with William the Conqueror, about 1066, and goes all the way up through Richard III to about the year 1500. Big kings along the way. Edward I, Longshanks, who conquered Wales and Scotland. Edward III, who started the 100 Years' War. He's going to be important, as we'll see. He was Chaucer's first king. Richard II was Chaucer's second king, and Henry IV was his third king. And then you can see here in yellow, that is the era of Chaucer. It was an age of jousts. Da, 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 da. So this knight is, he's going to war. He's got that look like, I'm going to kick some bottom. And that is him in a much more cartoony moment of his life. It was an age of chivalry. And courtly love. Chivalry can be defined as the honor code of the upper class, like knights. Courtly love can be defined as the love philosophy of the upper class, that is to say, knights, what they thought of love. And what they thought of love is pretty simple. The woman was a goddess. If she was an upper class woman, she was a goddess. She's always seen high up on a pedestal. And the knight is there to serve her, to worship her, to do whatever it is she asks of him. She's so high above me, she's so lovely, like that. Here's a sample of courtly love, the lady up in a tower. Climb up and rescue me. His response, of course, is very dashing. Let down your hair. Oh, that's gotta hurt. Oh, that's not follies, that's follicles. Ow. And then, of course, for her part, it wasn't easy. Oh, ow, ow, ow. So that's courtly love, basically, the essence of it. A new language came about. This is called Middle English. So the first period of the English language is from 700 to 1100. It's called Old English. But there was an invasion in 1066 of French-speaking overlords. And so the upper class, Normans, who invaded England, they spoke in French, and they brought Latin with them for scholarship for the church and that sort of thing. And they conquered the peoples there who, the Anglo-Saxons, the lower classes, they spoke English, what we call Old English. So if you mix those three languages together for 34 years into a pot and stir it, presto, you have a new language, Middle English, and it lasts from 1100 to 1500. This is a Middle English text. What it actually looked like, you can tell that it's not just the text, but you have monks carving beautiful artwork in the margins. And this is Middle English Northern dialect. It's a little more difficult for us. This is from Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, and it looks something like this. Siden the saga on the assault was cessat at Troja, the borg Britantan Brento Brondis and Ascus, the talk that the traumas of Cresen were rocht. So you can see, for example, there is looks like a number 3. That's actually a GH sound. And then there is this weird P-looking thing. If you look at the first line, it looks like CIPEN, and then PE. That's actually a different letter of the alphabet we don't have. It's the TH. So that second word, which looks like PE, is the English word the. And so we won't be reading this dialect of Middle English this semester. In fact, none of our courses teach this. presently, but that's what it looked like in the north. The northern dialect is also alliterative. So if you look at the first line, it says, "Seven the saga and the assault was cessed at Troya." What you hear is seven saga, assault, cessed. Next line you hear ba ba ba. Borg Britandan to Brondes. Ba ba ba. So doesn't rhyme, Troya doesn't rhyme with ascus. So northern dialect of Middle English is alliterative, as all of Old English is. This is the southern dialect of Middle English. This is near London. This is what Chaucer used. And this is much more readable. Juanat April with his Sjurasuta, the drukt of Martij Paris to the Rota. And so this is something we can read, we will read. I will train you how to read this, so don't worry about it. You're going to be reading this like the newspaper. Chaucer's dates: he was born roughly in the year 1340. He died in 1400, so he lived about 60 years. He was born into a London middle-class family of wine sellers. As a boy, he may have attended St. Paul's Cathedral School, where he would have been introduced to ancient writers like Virgil and Ovid. At 17, Chaucer became a page to the royal family, serving the wife of Lionel, Duke of Clarence, the second son of King Edward III. So he was a page, a helper, a low-level helper to the royal family, to the daughter-in-law of the king. At 19, he went off to fight as a soldier in the 100 Years' War, which was basically an attempt by England to conquer all of France. And it was started by Edward III, who was king at the time. And in fact, did indeed conquer most of France. So this is Edward III. This is some random French dude. And here is Chaucer. And again, this is actual historical film footage. In 1360, Chaucer was captured by the French. He was ransomed back to the English, and the ransom money was paid mainly by King Edward III himself. So that's how important Chaucer was on the field of battle. After Chaucer was ransomed, the king promoted Chaucer to a diplomat, a bureaucrat. And over the next 30 years or so, Chaucer traveled on diplomatic missions to places like Spain, Italy, and France. And he served as chief tax collector and manager of the king's estates at different times in his life. So he became a very high level, what we would call State Department official. And this isn't bad. It's, it can be a good thing to have that kind of power. Chaucer saw amazing events in his life. 1348 to 1349, when he was only 8 or 9 years old, the Black Death swept Europe. In 1 year, it killed between 1/3 and 1/2 of the population of Europe. Over 1,000 villages in England were wiped off the map. So let's say, for example, that you have blue eyes. Raise your hand if you have blue eyes. Okay, you're dead. You're dead. If you look around the room, if you're in a room, look around your house, 1/3 of the people are going to die in just a very few months. It sort of makes COVID-19 look anemic by comparison. Seasons don't fear the reaper, but the medieval people did. So the Black Death, here are people walking along, praying that the Black Death, doesn't get them, praying to God that it goes away. And this was they wore protective masks then, kind of like we are now during this COVID time. And that was plague fashion, as you can see. These people are experiencing the symptoms of the bubonic plague, and you can see their giant pussy boils. Very, very attractive, very, very sexy way to die. Bring out your dead. If you know Monty Python, this is actually sort of witty. And there was a lot of dead. Here is just a hole in Russia where at that time they just hurled the dead bodies. So skeletons were all over the place. Ring around the rosy, that is the pock marks on your body that's pulsing with pus. A pocket full of posies, that was what you used to cover your nose. They thought that would protect you from the plague. Whishes, whishes, that's sneezing. We all fall down. And we do. And we do what was called the dance macabre, the dance of death. So it was a lovely time, one of the worst moments in the history of humanity. Peasants' Revolt in 1381, as a result of social conditions caused by the Black Death, England was rocked by the Peasants' Revolt. So Chaucer at this time was maybe 21, and it was awkward. So there was just killing in the streets, blood. Basically what happened is the peasants had better economic opportunities because there were few of them. If you can imagine that you and your neighbor plowed a field and you got half the proceeds. If your neighbor was dead, you now plowed the whole field and you get all the proceeds. So the lower classes were getting wealthier, but the upper classes wanted to sort of oppress them at the same level they were before. And the peasants were like, let's kill people. Help, help, I'm being repressed. Wat Tyler and his rebels entered the city of London through the gate over which Chaucer lived. They proceeded to burn John of Gaunt's palace and to murder, among others, the Archbishop of Canterbury, who served as the Lord Chancellor. So they burned the palace of the wealthiest, most powerful aristocrat at the time, except for the king, maybe more so than the king, and also the Archbishop. Chaucer only referred to the revolt once in all of his writings in a funny moment in the Nun's Priest Tale. I'll show you that later. So basically it was, it was a difficult time to be alive. In the 1380s, when Chaucer was in his 40s, he moved to the southeastern county of Kent and served as Justice of the Peace and Knight of the Shire, which is to say, a member of Parliament. We would say a member of Congress, a congressman in America. Now, we have to remember that Chaucer was not a poet. As noted earlier, he was a high State Department official and cabinet member. All of his poetry was something he did on the side for fun and for notoriety. Yet, he was pretty good at it, just as a hobby. He seemed to have invented the English meter of iambic pentameter. If you've ever heard of iambic pentameter, Chaucer, I think, invented it. He wrote some minor poems in the 1370s, but he began to bloom in 1380 or so when he wrote one of his most acclaimed short poems. We'll read it, Parliament of Fowls, and also the first of the Canterbury Tales, The Knight's Tale. He wrote two major works in his life, the Canterbury Tales and Troilus and Cressida. We only read the Canterbury Tales. But he wrote many minor works, including the Book of the Duchess, the House of Fame, the Legend of Good Women. Chaucer was close friends with two other writers, scholar Ralph Strode and England's most famous poet at the time, John Gower, who wrote one work in Latin, one work in French, and his most heralded work in English, Confessio Amantis. That's John Gower. Chaucer wrote almost exclusively in English. At the age of 26, Chaucer married Philippa Rowett, the lady-in-waiting to King Edward III's queen, Philippa de Hainault. So he actually married way up. This marriage helped advance his financial and professional career path. So here's a medieval marriage moment. And here is the clergyman. Marriage. Marriage is what we come here for today. Marriage. The marriage lasted 21 years, ending only when Philippa died in 1387. Chaucer was 47 at the time. He never remarried. He had 3 or 4 children, including Elizabeth and Thomas, and he wrote a lovely little poem to Thomas about an astrolabe, like a star compass at the time. Chaucer's brother-in-law, the guy who married Chaucer's wife's sister, he was the richest, most powerful man in England. His name was John of Gaunt. He eventually somehow becomes Jean-Luc Picard, captain of the Starship Enterprise. Tea, Earl Grey, hot. So what we have here is Edward III had a lot of sons. The oldest one was the Black Prince, or the aristocrat formerly known as the Black Prince. No one ever likes that joke. Lionel, Duke of Clarence. That's the family that Chaucer served as a page. And then John of Gaunt. Lionel dies before Chaucer serves his wife as a page. So he's out of the picture. So that leaves the 2 oldest sons, or the 2 most powerful sons. There's a lot more of these children. Eventually, the Black Prince dies. Well, that's not good, because he was supposed to be the king. Edward III dies. So Richard II becomes king at 10 years old. He is the Black Prince's son. He remains Chaucer's king until 1400, the year Chaucer dies. So he's not a very good king. And really, the whole time that he's reigning, most of the time, his uncle, John of Gaunt, is really running things. And that's what Richard II looks like in real life. For many of those years, as I said, Chaucer's brother-in-law is essentially the acting king of England. But he dies in 1399, right near the end of Chaucer's life. In 1400, John of Gaunt's son and Richard's cousin, Henry Bolingbroke, overthrows Richard II, has him murdered, and becomes King Henry IV. Those of you that take my English Lit class, we often read, well, we always read Henry IV, Part 1 by Shakespeare, which tells this history. And Henry IV promotes Chaucer in his last year of life. Chaucer dies in the year 1400 at roughly the age of 60, which in the Middle Ages, it's not a really extremely young person to die at that age. Monty Python member Terry Jones is a fan of all things medieval. He wrote, among other books, Who Murdered Chaucer. Jones claims that Chaucer was murdered by the government for his attacks on the abuses of the Catholic Church. Jones' main arguments are from silence. He notes, for example, how odd it is the details and the timing of Chaucer's death are not recorded at the time, but arguments from silence really just means that you have no evidence whatsoever and you're making things up. So if you have no evidence and scholarship, you can't make a claim. Furthermore, it seems more likely to me that Chaucer would write his retraction at the end of his life, attaching it to the end of the Canterbury Tales, if he were slowly dying of cancer or some other ailment than he would just before he happened to be suddenly murdered. So at the end of the Canterbury Tales, the last thing he writes and attaches it to the last tale is this, which basically says, pray for me as I'm looking forward to passing from this world and going to the next world because I want to go to heaven when I die. Please forgive me of my sins, forgive me of my naughty books that I wrote. Why would he write that if he was about to be suddenly and unexpectedly murdered? It doesn't make sense. Good try, Terry Jones. You're very funny. It's just not very scholarly. So as your guide, my job is to get out of the way and let Chaucer point us in the right direction. And that's my show.